Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Once again, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Tawhid Kausar, and I will be the moderator for this breakout room. Before we begin, I would like to take a few minutes to go over some ground rules to ensure all our presenters and guests have a positive and educational experience. First, we ask that anyone who is not presenting to keep their cameras and mics off during the presentation. This will help to eliminate any background noise and distractions. Second, if you have any questions or comments, please type in the chat and we will go through them at the end of our session. There will be a Q&A session about. Number three, presenters need to stay within their allotted 15 minutes. When time is up, I will ask the presenter to wrap up their points so we can move on to the next presentation. This is to ensure that all our colleagues have time to share their researches. Lastly, we would just like to remind everyone that the session is being recorded. And on your screen, you will find the three dots at the top right corner. You can click on the three dots and there is an option which is turn on live captions. You can turn on the live captions so that everything you see will be printed at the bottom of your screen, and this will help everyone others. So I'm going to start the presentations. Our first speaker will be Julie Lammers. She is from Concordia University, Canada.
Okay.
So you can start. Yeah. Thank you. Juliet, your mic is saying that me on mute position. I can't hear you. Please unmute.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Okay.
And go ahead, please.
You can see
Thank
my
you.
slide?
Yes, I can.
Okay. All right. So first I'd like to apologize. I don't know if you can see, but my computer screen is having problems. It just started. So if you see flashing, I'm sorry. My name is Juliet Lammers, and I'm a graduate student at Concordia University in the Educational Technology program. I was also recently hired as a pedagogical counselor and instructional designer at Vanier College in Montreal. I'm very happy to be here today, and thank you to all of the organizers and my co-presenters. Today I'm going to talk to you about empathy mapping and how it can be used to bridge cultural and linguistic divides in international online education. So with online learning, the barrier of geographic distance is easily overcome, thereby increasing the participation of international students. And while such an international dynamic offers incredible opportunities, it also presents challenges. Sadikova and Dotterman address these challenges of cross-cultural distance education at 4 levels: the institutional, the technological, the student, and the faculty. Focusing on students and faculty, the authors identify a reciprocal relationship that is created by their interactions with one another. They explain, quote, the quality of cross-intercultural experience one receives in a particular course depends on the work done by the instructor and the student inside the virtual classroom. When learner and teacher come from 2 different cultures, misunderstandings related to language, modes of communication, and ideas about education and classroom behavior are bound to arise. These miscommunications are only magnified by the virtual dimension of an online course, in which the subtle communication cues of in-person interaction that can help overcome cultural and linguistic differences are obscured. In an effort to improve the experience in a cross-cultural virtual classroom, Sadikova and Dotterman call for the establishment of a third space, which is a new contingent cultural space derived from the needs of everyone present. It's a space that requires an openness to and understanding of different perspectives and backgrounds. It entails listening and giving all others the opportunity for self-expression, as well as a commitment from all parties to grasp this opportunity for generating new perspectives. Essentially, this proposed third space is a space of empathy. The concept of empathy underlies many of the recommendations prescribed for overcoming cultural differences in distance education, and recently it has gained traction in instructional design communities. It's also fundamental to the field of user experience design. Empathy is the ability to sense other people's emotions, coupled with the ability to imagine what someone else might be thinking or feeling. Using empathy in the design process helps designers better understand their users and, as a result, helps them meet their needs. And while much of the academic literature calls for the incorporation of empathy in the instructional design process, there's little focus on how designers and instructors might evoke and deploy empathy in practice. Drawing on literature from the fields of instructional design, distance education, and user experience design, the following presentation describes the problematic relationship between designer and learner in current distance education design practices, explores the concept of empathy and how it might be practiced in the design of distance education, and describes how to use empathy maps, suggesting that empathy maps are a way of sensitizing designers and instructors to students' circumstances, removing instructor bias, and helping instructors and designers make evidence-based decisions in the development and delivery of their courses. So in this first section, we'll look at the problematic relationship between designer and learner in current distance education design practices. When designing for a distant audience, one of the primary challenges designers face is understanding who they are designing for. It's a common problem in design-related fields, from education to engineering to industrial software and technology design. When we don't know who our users are, it is difficult to anticipate how they will interact with our designs and whether our designs will even be useful to them. Research finds that in current educational design practices, decisions are largely driven by factors that do not include the needs of the learners. Priority tends to be given to time and budget constraints, the needs of the institutional stakeholders, technological considerations, and desired learning outcomes. And while the learner is also a factor, traditional learner analysis practices do not provide the designer with enough information about their learners to create effective learning experiences. Colin Gray explains that current learner analysis in instructional design practice results in profiles that read more like market segments, including components such as basic demographic characteristics, reading level, and past experience with the instructional content. These components are not without value, but they are also not sufficient to develop empathy with the learner and to develop a rich understanding of how the learner may perceive and interpret the designed experience. Gray says learners tend to be normalized, while Rose and Tingley describe learners as homogeneous, faceless entities in the context of instructional design. And Jesse Stommel evokes the term counter-anthropomorphism, which he says is the tendency we have to remove the humanity of people we can't see. These may be people on the other side of a wall or people mediated by technology in a virtual classroom. With only a cursory understanding of who their learners are, designers often have little choice but to draw on their own experiences and perceptions, which likely differ vastly from those of the actual learners. Jim Patel of Stanford University's Institute of Design says, "We are working across cultures, across geographies, across political systems, and across myriad differences in the contexts of daily life. We cannot assume to understand their preferences. And their preferences matter. Learners need to feel engaged, connected, and inspired in order to succeed. To create course content that resonates with learners and inspires them, designers need to conduct substantial engaged research about the people who will be using or engaging in the learning experiences they design. As a pursuit necessarily tied to the growth and well-being of other people, educators cannot ignore the whole person for whom they are designing, including factors that may not easily be derived through traditional approaches to analysis or development." In this next section, we'll look at the concept of empathy and how designers might practice empathy in the design process. The most critical instructional design skill is the ability to step outside one's own perspective and see the design through the learner's eyes. In other words, Parrish is suggesting that designers empathize with their learners. In an effort to define empathy in the context of design, Kupri and Visser explain that it is related to a deep understanding of the user's circumstances and experiences, which involves relating to more than just knowing about the user. Relating to versus knowing about is an important distinction. Current practices in instructional design tend to analyze learners in terms of general characteristics, which may tell designers something about their learners, but does little to help designers actually relate to their learners in any kind of authentic, effective, or useful way. Based on a review of psychological literature, Kupri and Visser identified two components of empathy, the affective and the cognitive. Affective empathy is about feeling. It's an emotional response to another. When you smile, I smile. Cognitive empathy is about being able to understand another person's situation and imagine it from one's own perspective, putting oneself in the shoes of another, so to speak. Both components are necessary in order to effectively use empathy in the design process. One of the two will not suffice for understanding the user's world. Designers need to understand their learners' individual circumstances, the cognitive component, and they need to be able to have an emotional response to those circumstances, which is the affective component. The next question that arises is, how much empathy is appropriate in what nevertheless remains a professional context? The issue so far has been that designers do not empathize enough, but is it possible to empathize too much? In a qualitative study of empathic practices in distant design learning, Matthews et al. Found some disagreement among practitioners about how much empathy designers should have with their learners. While some designers believe that direct interaction with their learners enhances their work, others feel that there is a threshold that should not be crossed when it comes to contact with learners. One designer noted the risk of getting so far into the learner's brain that you may lose your original compass. Indeed, using empathy as a tool without adhering to a process could become a slippery slope. So how do designers achieve an amount of empathy that is just right? To guide designers, Kupri and Visser developed a framework that is based on psychotherapeutic practices. Kupri and Visser's framework involves stepping in and out of the user's life. Stepping in is needed for deep understanding. Stepping back allows for competent action. Their process consists of 4 phases. In the discovery phase, the designer enters the learner's world, either through approaching the user directly or studying materials from user studies. They're stepping in. In the immersion phase, the designer spends time in the learner's world and takes their point of reference. In the connection phase, the designer attempts to find meaning and emotional resonance with the learner. And in the detachment phase, the designer leaves the learner's world and designs with their perspective in mind. They step back. In order to go through this or any process of empathizing, this presentation turns to the field of user experience design, where empathy maps are a tool commonly used to help designers gain a deep understanding of their users. This is an empathy map. Empathy maps are developed at the outset of a project and continue to evolve and inform projects as new data emerges. The empathy map charts qualitative data about who the user is, what the user's goals are, and what the user sees, says, does, and hears. The idea is that see, say, do, and hear will provide information about the user's environment, their circumstances, and their behaviors. This information will help the designer understand what their user is thinking and feeling. Based on what a user is thinking and feeling, the designer assesses the user's pains and gains, which you see there in the middle of the head. Pains represent the user's difficulties, and gains represent their successes. So to reiterate, see, say, do, and hear help a designer understand what a user is thinking and feeling. And if you remember, thinking and feeling correspond to the cognitive and affective components of empathy that Kupri and Visser describe. Understanding what a user is thinking and feeling, or empathizing with a user, helps the designer assess a learner's pains and gains. Pains are the obstacles or challenges that a learner faces, their fears or concerns, their ideas of failure, and what makes learning difficult for them. Gains are about what the learner aspires to. What are their dreams or goals? What does success look like to them? And what makes learning easy for them? The data about learners that goes into the empathy map is gathered through qualitative research methods. They may include interviews or think alouds via chat or video conferencing, qualitative surveys, autobiographical sketches using text, video, or photographs, and storytelling techniques. The idea is to gather information about the learner's environment, their beliefs and behavior, and their concerns and aspirations. Once this data has been gathered, it can be organized into an empathy map. For the best results, the data should be gathered by the designers from the users themselves. When the designer is not the researcher, however, the process of charting data on an empathy map can be a way for the researcher and designer to communicate and come to a common understanding about the learner. So to conclude, I'd like to come back to the idea of a third space, which earlier I described as a space of empathy. A lot of recent scholarship in instructional and distance education design has called for the practice of empathy in the design process in order to produce more effective courses and improve student achievement. And while empathy has been deemed an important part of the design process, there's been limited focus in the literature on how instructors and designers might incorporate the practice of empathy. This presentation therefore turned to the field of user experience design, a field in which empathy is considered a fundamental tool. What I've learned from the professional literature on user experience design is that gathering and mapping the kind of qualitative data I have described will sensitize designers and instructors to learners who might otherwise not have access, who they might otherwise not have access to, by illuminating factors such as learners' backgrounds, their attitudes towards education, and their current circumstances, all of which will affect their learning experience. It will also help designers and instructors recognize and remove their own biases and assumptions, which can become particularly problematic in a cross-cultural context. And finally, it will allow designers to make evidence-based decisions about the design and delivery of their courses, which means they can incorporate methods, materials, and assignments that are relevant and appropriate to their learners and will facilitate their success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juliet. You are perfectly on time. Thank you so much for completing and wrapping up everything within your time. Thank you so much. Thanks for the presentation. And our next presenter is Matt Rahimai. He is from University of Guelph, from Canada. And the topic is rethinking online education to maximize student engagement. Please go ahead. Unmute yourself. Right, and go ahead. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to my presentation. I'm just checking, can you see my slides, please?
Yes, slides are visible and you are also audible, sir.
Excellent, thank you very much. So my name is Matt Rahimian and I'm situated in Hamilton, Ontario. I work at Queen's University and I want to acknowledge the lands that we are residing on and working on are located on the traditional lands of Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee indigenous peoples of Canada. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about rethinking online education to maximize student engagement. Now, my question is for the audience, I want you to imagine yourself for a second that you are entering into a communication, into some conversation with a group of people, and you suddenly feel that you get connected with people and you can build on the conversation and get engaged, etc., etc. That kind of pleasant experience is the one that we hope to create for our students in our classroom. On the other side, we have communities that and groups discussions when we feel that we are almost invisible or we are looked down at, and that's not something that we want to inculcate into our education. So thank you, Juliet. Like as our colleague mentioned, international education has challenges and opportunities that work hand in hand. The idea here of this conceptual paper is to maximize the opportunities available for students while turning challenges into opportunities as well. I get deeper into that in a second. So one of the big challenges of international education, or let's say about some opportunities, they have been discussed over the past 40 years or so, that learning from different instructors, studying at a different culture, sometimes learning a different language, interacting with people of different cultures, etc., etc. But also the challenges are big and they need consideration. One of the big challenges that I came across to in my research and scholarship of international education was isolation. Now, when I was doing my master's degree, second master's degree actually, I realized that sometimes international students are not fitting well into the communications when they enter into different communities of practice. I decided to do that as my research, and that was an overarching theory for my PhD that I completed in 2018. So isolation was the big challenge, and the issue with isolation was that it deprives the students from participation into group activities that could benefit them with building a community of practice, learning from their peers, and also developing their own identities. Now, the way I conceive online education, or this paper's main argument, is that online education, we need to consider three components to that: pedagogical content, social content, and emotional content. However, a lot of times, observing teachers and instructors, we realize that there is much focus on pedagogical content. However, there is less attention to the social and emotional components of learning. In other words, the scholarship of holistic education is not fully fulfilled here. Now, two methods could be applied and combined together to maximize student engagement, which increases their content learning, but also takes care of their emotional and social well-being. One of them is SAMR model. It has been used and it has been brought into attention at so many post-secondary institutes after the pandemic, which SAMR stands for Substitution, Augmentation, Modification, and Redefinition by Dr. Puentendura. The other method that could be combined with that is the backward design model, which was originally developed by Wiggins and McKay in 1998, basically talking about outcome-based education and thinking about outcomes and integrating that into instruction. But how to combine them to have a more effective and engaging classroom? Here are some practical techniques, and we have to look at them from an engagement perspective. Number one is minimizing the use of substitution, rather than that using modified and redefined techniques more so. A lot of times I work as the academic integrity coordinator at Queen's University, and a lot of times I could come across some instructors that substitute their in-person instruction with online instruction. That's effective, but to a certain level. Sometimes we need to modify and redefine our goals or our techniques, or both of them. So it could be inclusive and it could be more engaging. For example, use of like multiple choice. When we give multiple choice exams to students, we give them a piece of paper. Now giving them a Word document to do that, that's a substitution level. But designing the test online and randomizing that and randomizing the order of question, it moves it towards more levels of redefine and modify. And also, number 2 is increasing student engagement through different class, group, and individual activities. So rather than giving them like big projects to work on, break that big project into smaller pieces, and they can work on that and combine it with group activities. Now, one key to that group activity is that using the two-way tasks, which means different group members need to collaborate and share information to complete the task. For example, they need to do one small project in 2 weeks. So, and there is 5 students in each group. So student number 1 does part A, number 2 part B, number 3 part C, and D, and etc. Now, then we tell them to come together and combine their components, their parts, and create the whole and hand it in as a group project. That's an example of two-way collaborative task. Another way is to combine the principles of adult education, specifically the gradual release of responsibilities, with the SAM model. What I mean by that is in adult education, a lot of times learners learn by receiving the whole picture of learning, then getting instruction on different components, and then receiving the whole picture and instruction on that. So trying to remodify and redefine our goals of instruction, and then combining that with that principle, is another tested practical way to help increasing the engagement. And finally, number 4, applying the backward design model to both course and class planning. A lot of times instructors apply the backward design model, set the goals first and work backwards toward them for their course outline and syllabus. However, they need to apply that to each class instruction as well to make it more engaging, because for outcomes to be achieved, they need also to say how they want to achieve that. And that's the level that they can include engaging activities for their student. So if I want to test if students have learned what I taught them, even if it is informative, if it is just formative assessment, what I can do, I can say what kind of engaging activities I can give them, so they would engage with each other and with the content with class as well. Also, promoting authentic use of group work to promote learning. So students need to work in groups. However, that group work needs to be meaningful, and give them tips and support them and basically scaffold their learning in such a way that they can build some kind of mini community with their teammates, showing them techniques and even sometimes mentoring on how to approach each other and work together are very effective, and they are tested practical ways. Now, my conclusion is that by increasing student engagement, some of the techniques that I shared in the previous slide, they are not exhaustive lists, just some ideas to start the conversation for you colleagues and friends from across the world, and then add to them. So they can increase student engagement with the course content and with each other in classroom. That increases the interactions among students, which leads to more community building opportunities. And most of students would find it a valuable experience, including international students. Now, I understand that there would be still some people who don't want to participate so much and they are not willing to do that. That, for sure, we can find other ways to engage them, assign them to smaller groups, etc., etc. But the majority of students have more opportunities for building a community with their classmates and with the groups that they are working with. Then what happens? With more community building opportunities, the possibility of identity construction and learning is increased among the students. And basically, that's how it could be done. Okay, yeah, somebody just turned on the video. And that's basically the end of my conclusion. Thank you very much for your attention, and questions are welcomed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. You are well ahead. Okay. Our next presenters are from Memorial University, Canada. They are Noel Harley, Omotola Ogundel, Priscilla Minsha, Neva Clovis, and Abraham Apul. And the topic is the translational experiences of graduate students for living and studying in Atlantic Canada. So here, please go ahead.
Hello, I'm Noel Hurley, Professor of Educational Leadership at Memorial University, and I want to thank Dr. Clayton Smith, Fatma Ammar, and others who have organized this symposium and given us the opportunity to present what's interesting to us in terms of transitional experiences of graduate students to living and working in Atlantic Canada. I've been working with graduate students and learning from them for about 30 years, since 1991 at the University of Windsor. And I have been really blessed over that period of time to have had wonderful students. And I'm happy to introduce our presentation, the transitional experiences of West African students to living and studying in Atlantic Canada. 4 former graduate students share their personal accounts about the challenges, supports, successes, and other factors that facilitated or hindered their transition from Africa to living in Atlantic Canada. Factors that are investigated include differences, cultural differences that pose problems in adapting to Western lifestyle and culture, government and community programs that help these new Canadian residents to adapt to a new climate, and in case of Newfoundland and Labrador, much colder than we have in Windsor and other parts of central Canada, at least in the wintertime, and cooler in the summer, to our society and to our distinct culture here that we have in our eastern part of the country. The effects of social separation for families, friends, and community collectively are also of interest. Another common problem facing our African students in a new environment is a lack of adequate financing to permit them to fully concentrate on their academics. Many must work in service-oriented jobs to subsidize their studies. Also, many struggle to obtain permanent resident status and enough money to bring family members from Africa to live with them. We've organized our presentation to present common findings from the 4 individual experiences of our graduate students. Each of the African Canadian immigrants have either become permanent residents or in process of becoming permanent residents, and they will share their experiences in individual pieces that follow a similar format. The 4 former students, as all have now graduated, write from a personal perspective, providing a first-hand account with some reference back to research. And I'm going to briefly review the names and then introduce Omo, our first speaker. Omotolo Ogundele from Nigeria, Neba Clovis Nabange from Cameroon, Priscilla Mensah and Abram Aipao are from Ghana, and all 4 have just recently completed Masters of Education in Leadership Studies. And I'll turn it over to Omotolo to begin the real presentation. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Professor Noor. Hello, I am Omotola Ogundele, a recent graduate of Masters of Education from Memorial University. And it is my pleasure to share our experience as an international graduate student in Memorial University of Newfoundland in the last 18 months. From time immemorial, human beings migrate from one place to another for varieties of reasons. Few of those reasons have, but not limited to, economic reasons, political reasons, religious reasons, differences in societal views and opinion, quest for international education arising from globalization, and so on. According to a former study conducted by the Council of Ministers of Education and Training to determine the economic impact of international students studying at publicly funded colleges and universities in Atlantic Canada, research showed that the Atlantic provinces hold 4 of the top 5 spots in Canada for international students over the last 15 years, with Asia Pacific region as the largest source of students with 59%, followed by Africa, just like me, 18%, then Latin Americans and Caribbean regions with 10%. As indicated in the above research, permit me to say that the growth in the number of international students enrolled in universities and colleges in Atlantic region of Canada has contributed immensely to the economy of Canada as a whole. As such, it will be prudent to ensure that the international students enjoy a smooth transition from their home country after their arrival into various universities and colleges in Canada. Life, they say, is full of challenges. As a migrant with great aspirations, especially from developing countries like Africa, we expect a smooth transition on arrival, but unfortunately, irrespective of how much preparation we put ahead, we still struggle to survive. Few amongst the challenges that hindered our smooth transition in our graduate programs include, but are not limited to, cultural differences, financial struggle, loneliness as a result of separation from families, friends, and loved ones, communication barrier in terms of accent, technological issue with new learning method making assessment of online courses quite difficult to navigate, racial issues, and above all, atmospheric condition. All of the above mentioned challenges has resulted into stress, depression, and of course, inability to focus as appropriately in our academics. In the process of this research, I could not but ask myself one big question, which is, if in the face of all the struggles, I am able to perform far above average at the end of my program, what would have been my fate if all the challenges mentioned earlier did not exist? This is a big question for thought. Oh yes, as audience, you are probably pondering on the scholarship and other grant students receive in the course of their program. My colleague neighbor from Cameroon, a central part of Africa, will be glad to answer all your questions as he talks more on the benefits made available to international students. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Omotola. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to continue with our presentation. I'll be focusing on support we received as graduate students while in Canada. According to Stewart 2012, newcomer students must be integrated into the school community and connected to the people in the system who will aid the student if he or she encounters post-migration challenges. Most of us have been able to develop personally and transition smoothly in Canada based on the following supports. Firstly, orientation programs. The Internationalization Office and the Graduate Student Union played a critical role in us settling in Canada. They offered us orientation and walk us through the campus, show us how to navigate the campus and to assess whatever we needed to make studies more manageable. The Internationalization Office was very helpful as they took us through various immigration policies, student health insurance, student jobs, and student accommodation. Next was the Career Development Office. They helped us develop our resumes and cover letters to meet the Canadian standard before we could get part-time jobs. Next is the Writing Center. The Writing Center offered free services to us. Most of us went there and received help with brainstorming, revision, style, and general comments on our assignments and end of course papers. Student Wellness and Counseling Center. The Counseling Center was a backbone that kept some of us strong by dealing with stress, anxiety, and depression. They provided some basic life skills and strategies for dealing with social and emotional issues. The most important support we received came from our instructors. Most of the instructors were very welcoming and were patient enough to explain the course requirements and other details to us during lecture sessions. They encouraged us to walk in at any time when we had problems with courses and with settling in Canada. Also, the academic program administrator in the Faculty of Education was very important in the course of our program. We visited her on numerous occasions seeking advice on which courses and route to take. Governmental policies. The Government of Canada's policy for spouses to bring their family with them while studying was equally of great importance. Some of us had the opportunity to bring our spouses, and they were able to work and support us financially while we focused on our studies. Also, we benefited from the medical care plan by the government of Newfoundland and Labrador. We had the assurance of getting medical care at no cost in case of sickness while studying. Lastly, the food bank on campus was also helpful. We were able to get some food items monthly at zero cost. Though we received some support, we believe that there is room for improvement. My colleague Priscilla Mensah from Ghana will continue with some recommendations for a better transitional experience for future African students. Thank you.
Thank you, Neba. I'd like to quickly touch on some recommendations to aid international graduates in their transition. First of all, we'd like to recommend increase in funding. One of the problems that many international graduate students face is a shortfall in funding to pay for their programs. The School of Graduate Studies should have a better organization of the scholarships offered to international students and should inform students at application stage about what funding sources are available. Most African students are not privy to these funding opportunities until they are almost done with school. Also, funding should be extended to other routes beyond the thesis routes to encourage higher enrollment. The Faculty of Education provides partial funding to students enrolled in the thesis route only, while the other routes would have to fully fund for their tuition. Also, we'd like to recommend a training on the use of the online learning platform during orientation. We realize that most students spend a lot of time navigating the online platform and sometimes end up missing out on vital information due to difficulties in identifying where to find what they need. This makes online studies extremely challenging for most students. Therefore, training on the use of this platform will help a great deal. Diversification of instruction is another recommendation. Emphasis should be placed on the background of students during instruction. Instruction should be linked to the background of students by giving them the opportunity to connect lessons to experiences in their home countries. Lecturers should have a fair idea of the diverse culture of their students and make lessons relatable for them, as well as encourage students to share their experiences and knowledge of the subject matter. We'd also like to recommend increase in the hours of work for graduate students. Obviously, most graduate students are adults, who mostly have previous work experience and can easily juggle work and school and make enough money to ease their financial burden. Considering the limited funding provided by the faculty for international students, graduate students should be permitted to work full-time to amass enough money to pay their fees and equally take care of other responsibilities. Lastly, we would recommend the development of a matching program. The Internationalization Office can pair continuing students with first-year international students to help them settle in and provide them with the needed support. This could be a few hours of meeting every month or any time based on their convenience. To recap what we've discussed so far and to bring a closure to our presentation, I would like to introduce my colleague, Abraham Apple. Thank you.
Thank you, Priscilla. I will continue with the conclusion. Despite the challenges embedded in the academic and social conditions, most international students manage to change, adapt, develop, and achieve. International students' intercultural learning experiences are both transitional and transformational and necessitate identity change to a greater or lesser extent, according to Gill, Stratford, and Day, 2010. Gill et al. Indicate two types of transition. One is related to students' maturation, and the other is related to their improved intercultural understanding and competence. As they interact within different educational environments, cultures, and society, they continue to experience improved knowledge, awareness, skills, and attitudes, enabling them to function effectively within both their host and home countries. We have realized considerable personal growth and an increased sense of independence. To end with, we don't regret coming to Canada for our master's program, since it has paved way for us to interact with people from different countries and cultural backgrounds. We have also learned a lot in our profession as teachers, which upon our return to our home countries, we can inculcate into our students for a positive change in their attitudes to help our countries to develop. We are also prepared and will be delighted to stay in Canada permanently to contribute to the continued development of this great country. If anybody have any questions and concerns, we will be happy to address that in the questions and answer segment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. We've been in time almost. Now is the session for a question and answer. So if anyone has any question, please write in the comment box. I'll read it out.